Okay. I think
Everything there is to know about Jim, and he's going to tell us everything. Right?
You know what?
All right, well, Jim has been eating a whole food, plant-based diet since joining the Eat Smart, Live Longer Club in Sun City, Hilton Head, which, how many paying members do you have now? What's the count?
about 500.
About 500. That's tremendous. I mean, that's part of why this area is a leading part of this movement. There's just so much good transformation and education, support, everything going on out there. In Jim's talk, he will tell us about how he has eaten from that time until now. He will also tell us about the remarkable results he has seen as a result of changing to a whole food, plant-based diet way of eating. In addition to what Jim will be talking about, let me give you a sneak peek of what he has achieved in these 4 years. Jim is a graduate of the E. Cornell University T. Colin Campbell Center for Nutrition Studies and has a certificate in plant-based nutrition. He's a graduate of the Ruby Online Cooking School Forks Over Knives plant-based program in 2015. You can teach an old dog new tricks. Yeah. Jim has been writing the Food Matters column for the Bluffton Sun since 2014, where he writes exclusively about eating a whole food plant-based diet. Jim is past president of the Sun City Eat Smart Live Longer Club and is currently on the board of that club. He continues to keep himself up to date by participating in the annual vegan cruise. He's done that for 3 years in a row now. And he attends lectures by some of the top names in the field, as well as attending the Food Equals Medicine, which is now the Remedy Food Project, which is coming here. He's attended that in the past, and he's gone to the Whole Foods Plant-Based Cooking Summit in Lake Lure, North Carolina. Jim has been instrumental in bringing nationally recognized speakers like Dr. T. Colin Campbell and Dr. Greger to the local area. In fact, he's a personal friend of Dr. Campbell's who stayed at Jim's house while he was here. And most recently, Dr. Campbell's wife, Karen, invited Jim to help Dr. Campbell celebrate his 83rd birthday, which Jim helped him celebrate on the most recent vegan cruise. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim so he can tell you how he entered this world and how it has impacted his life.
Well, thank you, Carla. It's great to see a good turnout tonight for the talk. I'm going to talk tonight about how transformative a whole food plant-based way of eating is. There's a number of ways that eating this way can be transformative from both a personal health standpoint as well as from the environment, from climate change, and even on our attitudes. But I'm going to focus specifically on how a whole food plant-based way of eating transforms our health for the better. Let me pull up the next slide here. In doing so, I'll make a distinction between being vegan and being whole food plant-based. I count myself as being in both camps, but I think the distinction is important from the standpoint of when you're in a restaurant or trying to convey how it is you're eating. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I also need to provide some background information by talking about what some of the doctors say who promote the whole food plant-based way of eating say. So the doctors that I'll talk about tonight are not all inclusive. They're just a sampling of the various doctors who are out there. Some of the doctors that I have not included in this talk are Dr. Codwell Esselstyn, Dr. Brenda Davis, Dr. Michael Clapper, and Dr. Dean Ornish. But I am going to talk about 5 specifically. Dr. John McDougall, who authored the Starch Solution, Dr. Joel Furman, who authored Eat to Live, Dr. Michael Greger, who authored How Not to Die, Dr. T. Colin Campbell, which you mentioned, the author of the China study, and Dr. Neil Bernard, author of the 21-Day Kickstart program. So first, I want to talk about what this way of eating has done for me. And I'm going to show a before slide here. And this is way before. This is this is me, and I don't have a full-length picture of myself back then, but this is me back in the 70s. And at that time, I weighed a little less than 160 pounds, and I was 6 feet tall. And my wife used to say that I was so skinny that when we hugged, she could wrap her arms around me twice. And I was like that into my 30s. And then when I got into my 30s, I was a smoker at that time. And I gave up smoking. And I think partly when I gave up smoking, my metabolism changed. And also, when I gave up smoking, I started munching on potato chips, little bags of potato chips have something to do with my hands. That, and also I increased my ice cream consumption. And so over the years, I went from 160 pounds to, in 2013, 320 pounds. So this is how I looked 10 years ago. That's my granddaughter, who's now 10 years old. You can see that there's a difference between how I looked then and how I look now. Here's let's see. I think there's one. I had another before picture, but maybe I didn't put it in there. So what happened? Well, in July and in April of 2013, my wife Christine went into the hospital, and she went into the hospital because they found a brain tumor. And the experience that she had, and she was in the hospital for three and a half months before passing away, and I was spending like 24/7 with her there. There was a short period of time where she came home for a little bit, but for the most part, she was in the hospital during that entire time. And what happened was, it seemed like everything that the hospital did to try and make her better resulted in some kind of side effects that actually made her worse. And so this was a real education to me, because I was kind of naive, and I think we were both kind of naive about what happens when you go in the hospital, or what happens when you get sick. And we had a lot of things we were looking forward to. We had an anniversary trip coming up, and actually about a month after she went into the hospital, that was planned. We had plans to take the grandchildren to Disney World, and so we were asking the doctor, well, how quickly could they do the surgery? How quickly would she get out of the hospital, and we'd be back to life as normal? But that's not what actually happened. So she went in first. They did surgery to remove the tumor, and then within a week, fluid started building up in the cavity where the tumor was. So they had to go back in and do a second surgery to drain the fluid out of the cavity. And then because she'd been in the hospital for a period of time at that point, she ended up getting a pulmonary embolism. And it just kept going on and on like that. It was like one thing after another. Everything that was done to make her better ended up making her worse. So and then actually when she passed away, she didn't pass away from the tumor so much as she passed away from sepsis, which she got from chemotherapy and radiation, which lowered the white blood cell count, and she wasn't able to fight the infection, and that's what she passed away from. So my experience from all that was, I don't want to go in the hospital, So I came away from that experience thinking I needed to do something to make myself healthier. And as you could see from the before pictures, I did need to do something. So I began thinking about this, and as I was thinking about it, I had to go to the doctor to get prescriptions refilled. I had 3 prescription medicines I was taking at the time. And we had moved here in 2011, and I had been seeing a doctor back in Washington State, and my prescriptions actually, I don't know, they prescribe them every so often, but they got filled far enough ahead that I was okay until I went to the doctor later in 2013. And this new doctor took a look at me and said, well, you need to go on a diet. So he prescribed me going to a nutrition or a dietitian. And so that was one thing that, you know, I started to do. At the same time, I had a friend in Sun City. I was writing for Sensations magazine at the time, and Ellie Dixon, who wrote for Sensations magazine, told me about the Eat Smart, Live Longer Club, which actually was just forming a couple months before this all happened, and so it was kind of brand new too. So I was interested in that, and I started taking a look at it. But what I heard from the Eat Smart, Live Longer Club was, well, this is vegan, and I wasn't sure I could do vegan. But at the same time, there was a book that came out by Mark Bittman, and Mark Bittman was a writer for the New York Times. He was a food writer for the New York Times, and I read the New York Times, and so I knew who Mark Bittman was, and I liked his writings in that. So he wrote this book called VB6, which went right along kind of with what I was hearing from Eat Smart, Live Longer Club, because he was saying vegan before 6. And by that he was saying, go vegan all day except for one meal. And that one meal you could eat whatever you want to eat. And I thought, well, that's something I could do. And so I started doing that, started going to the Eat Smart, Live Longer Club meetings, trying to eat vegan all except for one meal a day. And I was going to the dietitian at the same time. And I was starting to lose weight. And the dietitian was saying, you know, that I was actually one of her best patients, which kept me going back because it was encouraging to hear that. But as I started doing this, I quickly, actually my taste buds started to change fairly quickly, and I found that I could start to eat whole food, plant-based, or vegan more than just once a day. I mean, just once, more than just except for one meal a day. So I started, you know, doing more and more days where I was just doing vegan. And one of the things I think that really got me going this way too is I challenged myself a little bit. At the time, my mom had moved up here to Hilton Head from Florida, and my brother came up to visit from Florida, and so we decided to all go out to eat. And my mom and my brother, and at one time too myself, favorite restaurant was Longhorn. We'd go out there for a steak, and so they wanted to go there, and I'm thinking, what am I going to do, you know? And I thought, well, I could stay with VB6, and I could order a steak or something for dinner that night. But then I thought, no, if I'm going to do this, I need to challenge myself and see if I can really do this. So I looked at the menu beforehand, before going to the restaurant, and I determined that I could order, and this wasn't ideal, but I determined I could order like a couple servings of rice pilaf, put a steak mushroom topping on top of that, and a side order of, say, asparagus and salad, and make that a meal. So I decided I was going to do that. And my conviction stayed until I got to the parking lot. And then as I'm walking in, I'm smelling the steak, and I'm thinking, yeah, I think I'd rather have a steak. But when I got inside, I said, no, I'm gonna do this. So I did. I ordered the rice pilaf with mushroom topping and the side orders. And the first thing that kind of surprised me was, you know, I thought the waitress would think, well, you're really weird or something, but she took it all in stride. You know, it was like nothing unusual to her about my doing this. And then when the meal came, it was presented very nicely. I mean, it really looked good. And And my mom and my brother's wife both looked at it and said, "Well, we wish we had ordered that." So that was sort of the first challenge I had, but it showed me that I could do it. And then the second challenge I had was I had really started in October, and one of the things that comes up really quickly when you start anything in October is the holidays are coming up. So Thanksgiving came up, and with my mom in Hilton Head and my daughter's in Savannah, and my daughter and her family, so we decided that at my house was the best place to meet in order to have Thanksgiving dinner. And I decided, I had a big green egg at the time, and I've since given to my son-in-law because I don't use it anymore, but I decided, I made a turkey for everybody, but I decided I wasn't going to do that. I was going to have a stuffed squash, and I came about that by going to online, and I looked at Dr. McDougall's newsletter, and he had Thanksgiving meals planned out. And the Happy Herbivore, who Carla mentioned earlier, she had a week of Thanksgiving meals planned out as well, which you could purchase for I think like $5 or something. So I did that, and I put together a Thanksgiving meal for myself that was whole food, plant-based. And once again, when we sat down to eat, my mom and my daughter were looking at it and saying, well, we would have liked to have had that. But it's interesting. In both cases, it was the women though who said, we'd like to have that. You know, my brother will never change, I think. You know, he's much a steak eater or whatever. So that's sort of where I'm at, or I was at. Now the results of doing this is I lost 150 pounds over probably starting in October 2013 and going through the end of 2015 is when I lost that weight. 2016 and the rest of 2017 I pretty much stayed the same, and which is good. I mean, I think I'm at a fairly decent weight. I could lose a few more pounds, but I've gotten off all prescription medications. I was taking 3 prescription medications at the time. I was taking blood pressure medication, I was taking cholesterol, and I was taking Flomax for enlarged prostate at the time. And I've gotten off all 3 of those. I brought my total cholesterol down from, it was over 200 at one time, down to 101. And my LDL, my bad cholesterol, is 57. I didn't put up here my HDL, which is the good cholesterol, but it's low. But from doctors who I've talked to, it's okay because my LDL is low. The HDL being kind of there to transport out LDL cholesterol. And so if your LDL is low, you don't really need to have a high level of HDL. And my total triglycerides are also 57, which is just a coincidence, but they were over 500 at one time. And my blood pressure, it averages in a range between 110/70 and 120/80, so it averages in that range. The other interesting fact or thing that changed is my telomeres, and I don't know how many of you know what telomeres are, but they're kind of like the plastic cap on the end of a shoestring. And the plastic cap on the end of a shoestring, in addition to helping the shoestring get through the eyelets of the shoe, is there to kind of keep it from unraveling. Well, telomeres do the same thing with your DNA. They keep it from unraveling and things getting out of place. Well, your telomeres shorten as you age, and you can change that, or you can lengthen your telomeres through diet and exercise. And so I was curious to see if my telomeres had changed, or, well, I didn't know what they were, but to see if they lengthened. And there's a laboratory in California that was established by a Nobel Prize winner in medicine. he established this laboratory where you can measure your telomeres. And so I sent a blood sample off to them, and my telomeres came back as being the length of an average 43-year-old person, and I'm 70 years old. So I was really, really happy about how that went. I also, a couple other things. I had a toenail fungus, which I didn't talk about for a long time, but it was in 2010 I first got it, and I went to the doctor, and he was prescribing medication for it and had me soaking my foot in Epsom salt and doing all kinds of things, and it wasn't going away. He wanted to pull the toenail off, and I was like, no, I didn't want him to pull the toenail off. So I learned to live with it. We moved here in 2011, and I still had it. I still had it in 2012 and 2013. After going whole food plant-based sometime in 2014, I looked down and I started noticing there was white space between the skin and the toenail, or where the fungus was in the toenail. So it convinced me that the fungus must have died, and it was just growing out now, and that's exactly what happens. It just kept growing out, and then it went away. So I say that's the food. I don't know for sure if it's the food, but I think, you know, that seems logical that it was the food that did that. The other thing I had, I don't know. I'm not saying that I have Parkinson's. I don't know if I have Parkinson's. But I had a little bit of a tremor that I actually started in 2008. And I had it, and it wasn't so bad as that I ever really got concerned about it, but it was there, and it was kind of an annoyance. And then, after my wife passed away, but before I went whole food plant-based, I started to notice when I was walking that one arm would swing and one arm didn't swing, which I thought, well, that's really strange, but I didn't think anything more about it. But then I had the TV on one day, and I think I just, there was an interviewer talking to a British author, and the interviewer asked the British author, when did you first learn that you had Parkinson's? And the author said that he had a friend who he went walking with in the mornings, and that friend was a doctor. And he said that his friend stopped him and said, I think you might have Parkinson's. And he said, why? And he said, because I noticed one of your arms swings and one of them doesn't swing. So then I started putting two and two together, this tremor and an arm not swinging. And I looked some online, and some sites mentioned that, some sites didn't mention that. At the time, I didn't go to the doctor because the one thing that I read was that there's nothing they can really do if it gets worse. I mean, if it gets really bad, then they can give you medications to kind of control it, but there's side effects associated with that, and you don't really want to do it, unless it really gets bad. So I didn't go to the doctor. Well, later I noticed that all of this went away, and I talked to Dr. Greger when he was in town last summer. Dr. Greger being the author of How Not to Die, and I told him about this. And he said that, because he's talked about food preventing Parkinson's, but he's never talked about it reversing Parkinson's. And he said that there are no known cases of food reversing Parkinson's. And so he said if I had gone to the doctor and I got that, diagnosis, then I could have been the first possible documented case of reversal. But we don't know that. So I have had a reduction in prostate size. I know that for sure. had no more acid reflux at night, and I have a whole lot more energy than I ever had. You know, I used to only be able to walk maybe 10 or 15 minutes at a time, or maybe 20 minutes, but now I go out walking for hours and go for miles and ride my bike for miles every day, and just have a lot more energy and a lot more ability to do things. So I'm not gonna have time to obviously cover every slide, but as Carlos said, if you're interested in my overall presentation, you can sign up to get the slides. I'm also going to put the overall presentation on YouTube, just basically a whole food plant-based diet. Just to mention what it is it's about eating vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, and spices as they grow in nature. It's not about, you know, processed foods or anything, but it's how these foods are grown in nature. And what it's not, or what you don't eat, is you don't eat, or you minimize animal products, oils, and processed foods, which have, as Carla mentioned, too much salt, sugar, and fat. So I'm gonna skip through a couple of these slides here. I want to get to the doctors for a minute, just to talk about the different approaches that they offer in their diets. Dr. John McDougall does the starch solution, and that's the next book I read after BB6. And it's kind of how I got really started, because the starch solution is it's real simple to follow. It's, Dr. McDougall says 70% starch, 20% vegetables, and 10% fruit. Now you can go down to 45% starch and up to 45% vegetables if you have a lot of weight you want to lose quickly. He says you can do that, but he also says you'll lose weight by doing the 70% starch, 20% vegetables, 10% fruit. It's a good diet for feeling full. You know, you can eat what you want in those groups, and you're gonna feel full, and you do lose weight. So his book, The Starch Solution, is one that if you're interested in that approach, I'd highly recommend. The one thing Dr. McDougall does not talk a lot about the specific vegetables to eat or the specific starches to eat. He's more concerned about you getting those groups of foods. On the other hand, Dr. Furman talks about Dr. Furman really makes salad the centerpiece of a meal as opposed to starch the centerpiece of a meal. And Dr. Furman is really about the nutrients that you're going to eat. So he breaks down vegetables, for example, into different categories of raw green vegetables, cooked green vegetables, and non-green vegetables, and saying you need to really eat from each of those categories each day. And he gives serving sizes in terms of how much of those to eat each day. And the non-green vegetables, he particularly calls out onions and mushrooms as two important vegetables to eat during the day. And he has what he calls G-bombs, basically, which G-bombs, the letters stand for greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds, and talks about eating those daily. Dr. Greger, who authored How Not to Die, which is an excellent book. I think How Not to Die is probably the best book in terms of a reference book for going back to, but also a good book to read. It's very readable, it's very easy to understand, and it's divided into two sections. He talks about the nutritional value of food from the medical standpoint in terms of, he talks about 15 chronic diseases that lead to death and how to avoid those chronic diseases through food. And then in the second half of the book, he talks about specifically how he eats and what he eats every day and how he suggests that we eat. And he breaks it down into the daily dozen. And he's big on beans, wants you to eat beans 3 times a day. Big on whole grains, eat whole grains 3 times a day. And in the vegetable category, in addition to the greens and the non-greens, he calls out specifically cruciferous vegetables and talks about their cancer prevention properties and wants you to eat cruciferous vegetables each day. And he talks about how to eat these things too. Like, for example, cruciferous vegetables, if you eat them raw, that's good. If you eat them cooked, then to really get the benefit from them, you need to combine them with some mustard or mustard powder as well. So that's all talked about in his book, How Not to Die. And Dr. Campbell authored the China study, and he too is really into the nutritional aspect of food, but he looks at it and says there's a lot of phytonutrients in that are in food that they don't even know what they are. There's thousands of phytonutrients that you say you can't even know what they are. So he advocates that you eat as wide a variety of whole foods, plant-based foods as you can, in order to get as much of those phytonutrients as you can into your body. And then Dr. Bernard authored the 21-day Kickstart program. He also brought about the Food for Life program, which we have a Food for Life instructor here, Leslie Haas, who teaches classes locally. And the Food for Life program, Dr. Bernard's programs are really good programs for not just the nutritional value of food, but he's really into getting good taste in the food and advocating food that really tastes good and it's good to use. So just a little bit, I talked in the beginning about how I eat, and one of the early ways I found of eating was Jeff Novick's. He has some DVDs called The Fast Food Ways of Eating, and I started doing this because for me, I had never cooked before, and it was quick, it was easy, and so I started doing it this way. Basically, it uses a lot of frozen vegetables, frozen foods, but that way, I wasn't used to cutting and dicing. When I did start cutting and dicing, I was cutting my fingers all the time. I've since figured out how not to do all that, but it's a good way to start if you're able to enjoy that. I give his basic methods at the end of the slides. There's the longevity soup. I give a recipe for that, and then also he has ways of combining 5 different ingredients. The same basic 5 different ingredients, like frozen vegetables, diced tomatoes, tomato sauce, some kind of starch, whole grains, and spices, and he combines these, and beans, and there's beans in there too. Combines these into all kinds of different dishes, and he shows how on his DVDs, but it's easy to do. You can almost think of, any combination of those 5 things you can put together and make a meal out of. So I found that to be very easy to start with. Then I discovered this became my favorite meals, and I started eating this. I probably ate this almost every night for about a year and a half. This Kokaman, I found it because I was writing for the Bluffton Sun. I still write for the Bluffton Sun about food, And the editor asked me if I could do something for St. Patrick's Day. And so I started thinking about that, and I went online and I asked people in Facebook groups what would be a good whole food plant-based way of eating for St. Patrick's Day. And several people came back with several different recipes, ideas, but one of them that came back was this Kokanen. And I thought, well, I'll give that a try. So I made it, and I just loved it. I mean, it's fantastic. And so I just kept making it and making it and making it. And I don't make it as much now, but I do still make it quite a bit. And it's basically, it's mashed potatoes, it's got cabbage, kale, leeks, cashews in it, and then some spices, cardamom, and I put a little bit of mustard in, and it's really, really good. So I've given you a recipe as well at the end of the slides for that as well. And the miso soup I learned about on the first vegan cruise I was on, and each vegan cruise since, they always have miso soup up in the buffet, at least for breakfast, and I was usually going up to the buffet for breakfast. So every morning I was having miso soup, and it was really good. And I talked to people, I met people on the cruise who were very healthy, and they were all eating miso soup, and so I thought there must be something to this. So I started doing that. There's some criticism of miso soup because of the sodium content. Miso is high sodium, but it's also high potassium, and potassium lowers blood pressure where sodium raises blood pressure. And most of the studies that I've heard about on miso soup have actually shown that people's blood pressure does not increase as a result of eating it. And in some studies, it's actually shown that they decrease blood pressure levels. So I don't think that that's a worry when it comes to the subject of miso. These are just a couple approaches that I've taken more lately. Dr. Greger, Dr. Furman, trying to think more in terms of nutrition as opposed to thinking in terms of weight loss. I would say really I kind of go back and forth a little bit between this way and the Kokanen, or you could even say this way and Dr. McDougall, who's kind of starch-based and very much about potatoes. The Kokanen is kind of a comfort food, and so I'll maybe eat this way for a week or two, and then go back and eat Kokanen and miso soup for a week or two. So I tend to go back and forth a little bit on this now. These are some of the things, everybody's always asking me what I snack on. And actually I find that I snack less and less now than I used to. I can go throughout the day without snacking. My bad habit is after dinner I tend to want to snack more. But these are some of the things I've learned to snack on. First one, raw Brussels sprouts. I never thought of eating Brussels sprouts raw until fairly recently, and then I had them in a salad in a restaurant in Savannah, and thought, well, this is pretty good, and so I started doing it at home, and I like it, so I'll snack on that sometimes. I snack on unsalted peanuts a lot, and that's one of the things. I have a slide in here about nuts, but nuts can be kind of controversial because they're high in fat, but they're high in a good fat.
Finish your video.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, nuts have been shown. Dr. Greger says in How Not to Die, he says that not eating nuts is a cause of death, which is another way of saying people who don't eat nuts, or people who do eat nuts live longer. And that's what studies have shown, people who eat nuts live longer. And one of the things people think in terms of it keeps you from losing weight or causes you to gain weight, but my experience has been just the opposite. I've been eating nuts ever since I started this way. I've been snacking on peanuts for 4 or 5 years, and what the studies have shown that I've read and Dr. Greger's talked about are that when you eat nuts, it increases your metabolism, and it actually causes the calories to burn off faster, not just the nut calories, but the other foods that you're eating as well. So you're actually burning calories faster as a result of eating nuts. And they've now been shown that they improve endothelial function as well. So they help in terms of heart disease and that as well. So I've never been afraid of eating nuts. As I said, I snack on peanuts in the morning. For breakfast, I have oatmeal. I always have walnuts on my oatmeal. I have flax seeds on my oatmeal, and I use almond milk on my oatmeal as well. So there's like 3 different kinds of nuts and seeds there. I also put nuts on salads at lunch and dinner. I put walnuts on at lunch and dinner because it's important to have some fat with raw vegetables in order to absorb the fat-soluble vitamins that are in things like vitamin A and carrots and that kind of thing. So I eat nuts throughout the day.
But you're not talking about the hickory smoked or the honey roasted.
Well, right.
Clarify. Raw, unsalted.
Yeah. The nuts I eat are raw, unsalted.
The other kind will make you gain weight.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. I don't eat roasted nuts. In fact, well, a favorite of mine is pistachios, but I don't eat them because they're roasted. Now the peanuts I think are dry roasted, but that's the only. But they're unsalted. I also eat like one Brazil nut a week for the selenium, and sometimes I go in the grocery store and I'll buy a month's worth of Brazil nuts. I'll buy 4 at a time.
But that's at the advice of Dr. Greger, who has studied this.
Yeah. I think maybe just one other topic I'll cover quickly here. Vitamins supplements that I take. For the most part, we all know about taking B12, and I take B12 regularly. The other ones, the vitamin D3. These other 2 are recommended by Dr. Greger also on how not to die, and also Dr. Furman recommends the same supplements in his books as well. Vitamin D3, it's actually a hormone. It's produced by getting enough sunlight. We're in an area where it's actually, we're kind of marginal as to getting enough sunlight or not getting enough sunlight. I hear about people having vitamin D deficiency all the time, and so I figure I'll take the vitamin D3 to play it safe there. And the other one is DHA, EPA, which I think is really important. When I had a hard time giving up fish at first, not because I wanted to eat fish, but because you hear nutritionists and dietitians talk all the time about eat at least two servings of fish a week. And the reason they talk about eating two servings of fish a week is just for that, for the DHA, EPA, which is the long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. Your body can convert short-chain omega-3 fatty acids to long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. So your short-chain ones come like in walnuts and flax seeds and chia seeds and so on. But when you get to be over the age of 65 in particular, your body doesn't do as good a job at converting them. And there's been a lot of deficiencies found. In fact, there's an old video on the internet that Dr. Greger did many years ago. I mean, he's really young in this video, but he talks about that, about vegans being deficient in terms of DHA and EPA. So I think it's worth taking those. I made another slide which isn't here, but there's two things I also pay attention to, and that's iodine, because I don't eat iodized salt. You know, salt is iodized for the very purpose of everybody getting sufficient iodine, and that's important for your thyroid. So not eating any salt at all, other than maybe what I get in a restaurant, but I don't sprinkle any salt in food, and I don't use it in cooking or anything. I'm concerned about iodine, so I eat kelp or seaweed, sea vegetables, in order to get the iodine. Kelp's a little high in iodine. I mean, you could eat dulse or some of the other sea vegetables, wakame, but that's what I do. I just sprinkle a little bit of kelp on my oatmeal in the mornings. And the other one is I try to eat something fermented, sauerkraut or something, because the fermented foods contain K2, which actually takes calcium out of your bloodstream and puts it into your bones. And that's what you want, is you don't want it in your bloodstream as much as you want it in your bones. So eating something fermented each day makes a difference in that respect. So I think with that, I'll stop. I've gone over my time, but there's more in the slides. There's some recipes. I give you a recipe for the Kokannon. I also give you a recipe for what I call cherry nice dream, which is like Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream. It's delicious, but it's made with frozen banana and frozen cherries. And so there's recipes in the slides, and there's a lot more information in the slides than I've had time to talk about tonight. But
Okay, thank you so much, Jim. That was wonderful. All right, we are a little over the hour mark, so if you need to leave, don't feel embarrassed about getting up and leaving. We're going to do the drawing for the cookbook, so if you don't have your name in the fishbowl yet, run up here and do that. And then if you want to hang out a little bit and ask Jim any questions, or just ask general whole food plant-based / vegan questions to the group, you can do that also.